Police in Japan have arrested Mark Karpelès, the CEO of a failed Bitcoin company. Mt.GOX was one of the world's largest Bitcoin exchanges until last year. It lost millions worth of Bitcoins, leaving angry investors without their money.
I had no idea who he was, Mark Karpelès, some guy who has a first Bitcoin exchange, and he's sitting on top of, almost $1 billion worth of money. And where did it go?
Avant de faire parler de lui dans le monde entier, Mark Karpelès a grandi à Dijon. Sa mère nous raconte le parcours de ce génie de l'informatique.
Mon ambition, c'est de devenir maître du monde, mais je pense que je ne suis pas le seul.
This whole burgeoning ecosystem and technology was essentially entirely dependent on this, 20-something French guy sitting there in Tokyo, with his cat.
Là, il parle de l'homme qui est aujourd'hui le plus détesté d'Internet.
All of a sudden, this website just crashes and burns, seemingly out of nowhere.
Alors ça, c'est un bouton d'autodestruction.
There were up to 1 million accounts, so it's a hell of a lot of people out there who've got reason to be angry.
Donc, il faut activer les 3 éléments dans l'ordre.
So this is almost more like a Wild West robbery.
Et ben...
Bitcoin, a utopian idea, a virtual currency, free.
Just imagine. Imagine a bank you can trust. A bank that knows...
Imagine, above all, a world without banks or bankers. A world in which the governments no longer control their currencies or its value. This new world is a currency. Digital, free, universal, as easy to use as a credit card, but as discreet as cash. And its name is Bitcoin.
Are you ready to bypass the system?
In 2008, this was a period of financial crisis. The system almost failed again. But the central banks came to the rescue, printed trillions of dollars to bail out the banking systems and all the large mortgage holders. There were bailouts all over the world.
It created this whole new desire to have a financial system that existed outside the bounds of Wall Street, outside the bounds of central banks. There was this desire to kind of return money back to the people.
At the time, there was a small group of people that were working on the idea of a new digital money that would be entirely private, be not connected with the government, be global, and purely digital.
The immediate reaction to thinking about electronic cash is that it can't be possible, because if it's digital, you can make a copy of it. If I make a copy of it, then aren't there two of them now? Like, it just naturally wants to fit in your brain.
And it was 2008 when Satoshi Nakamoto, which is a pseudonym for somebody else, or maybe several people, we still don't know, but came up with this idea of a ledger. a ledger that would belong to everybody, that everybody could see. And there would be a protocol to enter and exit the ledger. And there would be a very carefully scripted algorithm that how many of this new unit called Bitcoin could be created.
When you start reading about the blockchain and distributed ledgers, it just clicks. Like, oh wow, there really is this way to do this decentralized authentication of transactions where you really could have a digital cash system. And then it sort of turns on another part of your mind to this whole world of possibilities that weren't possible before. It was very apparent to me early on that it was going to be a big deal.
It's alive! It's alive!
The very first product that I bought was a pair of pliers. I didn't need pliers, but that was the first thing, and I was in a hurry. So I clicked that, and they said, okay, now scan this code. There's a QR code, so I scanned it, and send us the money. So I sent it, and they said, your transaction is done. And really, I had a sense, like a breathless sense. They didn't know my name. They didn't have to know my identity. It wasn't based on a trust relationship. They didn't have to access my credit history. Nothing matters except that I owned something. So you have to understand, it was like a cash transaction, except the person I'm transacting with is not in front of me. The person is somewhere else, could be anywhere in the world. Nothing like that has ever been possible in the history of the world. And when I realized this, I thought, I can't believe this. I can't believe this just happened. So I got up, and I remember just dancing around my dining room table, just kind of like doing a little dance, going, that's the future. I just saw the future. And I realized at that moment, if this works, the relationship between the individual and the state and our whole public lives are going to change forever. When? I don't know, but it's going to happen.
Bitcoin was really fed by some of the same philosophical impulses as the internet, and also some of the same sort of technological concepts as the internet. You know, both are really, on a technological level, about taking power away from the center. At the core, the internet and Bitcoin are really about decentralizing power.
Money,
Un des slogans du mouvement cyberpunk d'il y a très longtemps, qui imagine un avenir assez sombre, c'est « Information wants to be free ». L'open source, Linux, Internet, et donc Bitcoin ensuite, sont les outils principaux qui peuvent nous permettre d'améliorer le monde et d'apporter un peu plus de véritable liberté aux gens.
If you study economics, you realize the more economic freedom people have, the higher their standard of living. If you or I print a bunch of money in our basement and go around town spending it, we would go to jail for counterfeiting because it's economically destructive and is stealing from everybody else. When governments do the exact same thing, when they print a bunch of money, it doesn't change what it is. It's stealing, and it's wrong for the exact same reason. And as a voluntarist and a libertarian, I have a huge, huge problem with that. And so the invention of Bitcoin strips that power away from every single government in the entire planet to do that.
Je ne suis pas anarchiste, il ne s'agit pas de supprimer totalement l'État. L'État est quand même utile. Mais je pense que si le peuple reprend le contrôle de la monnaie, il est possible qu'on puisse remettre l'État à sa place.
Bitcoin could mean different things to different people. One of Bitcoin's strengths is that, you know, it had all these different elements to it, and somebody could be into it because of the political aspect, and somebody could be into it because of the, you know, technological advances that it made, and, you know, everybody could, you know, kind of have their own connection.
La seule fois où j'ai vraiment changé le monde, c'est en disant une seule phrase à Marc. Il faut absolument que tu jettes un œil à Bitcoin. Je suis sûr que ça va trop te plaire. Au moment où j'en parle à Marc, Bitcoin, c'était totalement amateur. C'était vraiment un petit truc de geek, de gamin. C'était un jouet, presque. Même si, techniquement, derrière, il y avait quelque chose de génial, le monde qui se construisait autour, c'était presque un jouet, un jeu. C'était pas encore sérieux, c'était pas encore suffisamment sécurisé au niveau des sites web, etc.
Certainly, in the first few years, the typical Bitcoiner was a guy who spent most of his life in front of his computer, and not a whole lot of time with other humans. But these were people who kind of lived, to one degree or another, sort of in their own world and could inhabit this abstraction, which was this new money. There was no reason to think it would work, and so you had to be a little weird to devote any time to this.
J'ai une culture de programmation, mais quand je suis rentré dans le code de Bitcoin, à lire le code, la logique, c'est quand même quelque chose de techniquement très complexe. Peut-être moi j'aurais été capable de tout comprendre, mais j'y aurais passé 1 an ou 2. Marc, a priori, pendant 2 mois, il n'a pas beaucoup parlé sur le chat. Quand il est revenu, il avait tout compris. Donc il a vraiment dû découvrir quelque chose et voir qu'il y avait un avenir, voir que techniquement c'était fiable, sécurisé, utile.
I got into economics because I realized the quality of money has a lot to do with the quality of our lives. You get the money wrong, you get everything wrong. With Bitcoin, we have a chance to get the money right. And it can liberate the world. At least 1/3 of humanity is unbanked today. This provides them financial power, access, a chance for a better life for everybody, equally, democratically, all over the world, regardless of race, sex, religion, nationality. I mean, that's awesome. That's beautiful. That's utopia to me.
God damn it, that shit itches. Us libertarians, we don't like uniforms too much. Of course, when Mark bought Mt.GOX, he'd expect to end up 4 years later handcuffed to the back of a cop car. Did you, Mark? Huh? Whatever. Beginning in 2011, Mt.GOX became the first credible internet site to exchange dollars into bitcoins. The thing is, at the time, well, a bitcoin wasn't worth $1, so let's be honest, nobody really gave a fuck. But just a few short months later, the media dragged Bitcoin out of the shadows, and Mt.GOX went from 3,000 to 60,000 clients in just a matter of weeks. And that was the beginning of the glory days. Pas vrai, Mark? Isn't that right? Mark!
Mt.GOX was the first place where you could turn your fiat currency into Bitcoin. It was the exchange. There wasn't really an alternative. Mt.GOX was the bank of Bitcoin, essentially.
They had like 98% of the world's market share. If you think of Bitcoin as being an island, at that time, Mt.GOX was the only bridge to the rest of the economic world.
The growth in Mt.GOX was very quick as we saw, very large increase in users. The first few months after I joined, it started changing and we were getting a lot more structure and actually overseeing a lot of the business side of the company.
As time went on and Bitcoins became more valuable, people would leave larger deposits for a longer amount of time in Mt.GOX. So someone might have $10,000 or $15,000 in their account at Mt.GOX and have it there for 2 or 3 months while they were waiting for a good time to trade for Bitcoins. So Mt.GOX became very popular very quickly, became very successful very quickly.
Mark was always a believer in Bitcoin, and he really thought that, this could do something, and he really wanted to make the company work. He was always like in front of a computer late at night, early in the morning, and when he'll be in the office for a long time, it seemed like he was always busy and stressed out, but that he was always like doing something and trying to actually make Bitcoin into something very useful in the future because he really believed in it, and he did talk a lot about it. Mt.GOX is like, his I want to say like his baby.
私はカルプレスマルク・マリ・ロベルトと申します。1985年6月1日、フランスのシュノーブという町で、Mt.GOXでは代表取締役として勤めてたんですね。Quand j'ai pris Mt.GOX, on était, je crois, à 2000 ou 3000 comptes clients. En fait, 2 ans après, on a atteint le million de clients. Donc, c'est une évolution qui est assez rapide. Et je pense pas qu'il aurait été possible à qui que ce soit d'imaginer que ça se serait passé comme ça. En fait, Mt.GOX n'est pas vraiment une banque, vu que la fonction de Mt.GOX n'est pas de stocker ou de contenir des comptes où les gens déposent leur argent pour les laisser. Quand quelqu'un dépose, par exemple, de l'argent sur Mt.GOX, c'est dans le but d'acheter des bitcoins pour ensuite les retirer et les utiliser quelque part ou les garder chez lui. Après, je sais pas exactement comment les clients, eux, voyaient ça. Moi, forcément, au niveau de Mt.GOX, le fait de voir autant de bitcoins stockés, déjà, ça m'empêchait de dormir la nuit. J'ai dû mettre en place tout un système de surveillance.
Mt.GOX, I think, was trusted as the place that people could manage their bitcoins, could manage their money. It was the website where everybody wanted to store their bitcoin. It was the most popular place. Once you become the central bank of Bitcoin, basically, you become a target.
Any Bitcoin company was a target for hackers. I mean, this was just digital money that was just sitting there. This was kind of the simplest bounty system in the world where, you got the password, you had the money. But certainly Mt.GOX was the biggest of them all, so it was the biggest target.
Si je me souviens bien, on était en moins $1 début 2011 et en juin, on était monté à $30. Du coup, des nouveaux besoins sont apparus d'un seul coup. Et en l'occurrence, la première solution qui est présentée, c'était de faire des cold wallets qui sont complètement séparés du système.
We started using something called a cold wallet, which means that the bitcoins in the wallet can only be accessed using physical means.
Donc pour ça, l'idée, c'est d'abord d'acheter un ordinateur au hasard de la boutique, prendre son carton et s'assurer jusqu'à la fin que personne ne touche à l'intérieur du carton. Il faut aussi une imprimante, s'installer dans une pièce isolée, sortir aussi de l'ordinateur tout ce qui est matériel de communication. On passe à la génération des cold wallets. On met dans une enveloppe scellée, et après, il y a l'auditeur qui a servi à générer ce cold wallet, qu'il faut le détruire physiquement.
That prevented hackers from ever being able to access the cold wallet, because they would have had to have access to the physical piece of paper that had the secret written on it to be able to get into that wallet. So bitcoins would initially go into the hot wallet or the main wallet, be kept there for a little while, and it would be eventually sent to the cold wallet.
Bravo. Really, that was rich. What Fat Mark forgot to tell you was a lot of that money he made was off guys like himself, too stoned to go to their dealers.
Hey, talking about me? Why should I freeze my ass off in the streets? With a couple of clicks on Silk Road, I can have my shit delivered to my door.
Silk Road was this website that was sort of incredibly, you could order drugs as easily as you could order a book from Amazon. The only way that they would purchase drugs and other items on Silk Road was by using Bitcoin. That was the only currency that was accepted. You couldn't pay in dollars, you couldn't pay in euros, you couldn't pay using a Visa card, you had to pay in Bitcoin.
No credit card, no trace. He pays in Bitcoin. It's like he was a ghost.
T'en veux?
No thanks.
Without Mt.GOX, I don't know, if Silk Road could have been what it was. This was the way that people turned their dollars into cocaine. This was the central mechanism that made that possible.
The Silk Road was probably the most successful startup company ever in the entire history of the world. It went from absolutely nothing to probably $1 billion+ in sales over the lifetime of the Silk Road. Wow, congratulations.
I don't think that Mark Karpelès tried to become the, bank, the online bank to drug lords or anything, but that was certainly what it became.
Est-ce que MTGox a profité de l'ascension de Silk Road?
Indirectement, oui. Pour peu que je sache, pas loin, entre un tiers et la moitié des transactions sur MTGox étaient liées à Silk Road.
All of that popularity and success went towards making Mark feel he was important. He was originally interested in a Lamborghini for himself. He also bought himself a large house and then a penthouse. And all of these things seem to say that he wanted to show everyone that he was making money and his status in the world was rising. As that sort of thing started happening more and more, many of us started becoming uncomfortable, and Mark replied that his grandmother owns a castle in Austria and said that if we can't trust him, then there's nothing more for him to talk with us about. There was no way to tell how much money the company was making, how large its expenses were, or where the money was going in the company, because Mark was the only one with access to the accounts, and he refused to share that information with anyone else. He always thought that Bitcoin, because it wasn't a real currency, none of the laws really applied to it.
My name is Gambarian. I'm a special agent with IRS Criminal Investigation. We've been around for almost 100 years, and we go back to the days of organized crime, Al Capone. Of course, I have to put that out there. That was a famous IRS case, We're always on the lookout for emerging currencies or methods of payment that could be used to facilitate crime. When the Bitcoin came out, at least in the early days, that was kind of, it's like, how do we even track this? I mean, it's just numbers floating around in the Bitcoin world, and to us, that was kind of, it was a hurdle.
Well, government was just starting to take notice of Bitcoin. And like with a lot of new technology, it's unclear how the law applies to it. No one really cared that much until the Silk Road, because you had, people selling drugs and telling Chuck Schumer you can't do anything about it. All he can do is kind of cry about it on the Senate floor. So they started looking for ways to regulate it and how to make a statement.
Heroin, opium, cannabis, ecstasy, psychedelics, stimulants. They're all listed in the light of day. It's unbelievable. And it's all hidden because they don't use dollars. They use this surrogate currency.
I think it was in the spring of 2013 that the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network put out a one-page regulation, just like one page, and they faxed it to everybody. They said if you're going to be exchanging dollars for Bitcoin and back again, you have to have a license. Getting this money, these licenses, costs more than $100,000 because you have to give a license in every single state, and it's a terrible regulation.
There's lots of people in government that they get furious inside when they think people are doing stuff without my permission. People are engaged in free trade with each other without my permission. People are smoking or growing plants without my permission. They get angry and they want to steal money from other people in the form of taxes and then use that stolen money to lock those people that are growing plants without their permission and lock them in a cage, or people that have a white powder that makes them feel happy. They have to lock those people in a cage. This is madness. This is craziness.
Just because it's a new emerging technology doesn't change the fact that you're still dealing with money, and there's still potential for criminals to use your services. And the reason that there are these laws is to prevent that. So even if you have a new company, if you have this new idea, great, do it. But you're still bound by the same laws that are in place for these types of businesses, which are money service businesses, or financial institutions.
The major importance of the FinCEN ruling is that before that, you had a lot of people who still wouldn't agree that there was any value to Bitcoin, right? Like, it was just software. Software really can't be money, right? And then this, financial crimes ruling comes out, and it says, no, really, this is money. It was just a different world after that.
At that time, there's sort of a cottage industry of day traders, people who are trying to make money for themselves on the side by buying and selling Bitcoin. At one point, I did a story where I was talking with some people in a chat room who were doing this, and it really sort of surprised me, the kind of range of people that were doing it. There was a business student, there was also a biology doctoral student, there was a bunch of different kinds of people who, decided it was worth their while to buy and sell Bitcoin.
That's when real Silicon Valley firms, Andreessen Horowitz, Union Square Ventures in New York, started to make their first investments in this space.
There was a lot of hype in the media amongst journalists, trying to figure out what Bitcoin was. So, I thought, this is definitely exciting. This is definitely something I want to be part of. And since Mt.GOX was the largest player in the world, I thought, what a great opportunity to get involved, with that Bitcoin movement at the time.
For creatives, this is a dream come true. You have a company that's ostensibly flush with money, who has a huge customer base in a market that's just beginning to explode, has no brand, really. Everything needs to be updated. I mean, this is a dream come true.
It was just heaven. It was actually quite exciting to be a part of this. When I spoke to people in Japan and abroad that we were working on the GOX account and working with Bitcoin, everyone was just fascinated.
It was really amazing how much interest there was from outside, from these major VCs and hedge fund guys and high net worth individuals in New York, China, all around the world, interested in doing business with us, not necessarily investing in the company, but buying a shit ton of Bitcoin.
It was, let's make something that's fucking amazing, that everyone is going to look at and say, well, this is the exchange that we're going to put our faith in.
The first thing that we did, we decided that any press communications that came in should go through me. We all agreed on that. I come in second day, like 9 a.m., first thing, walk in the door, and there is Mark sitting on that blue ball being interviewed by, I think it was Reuters. And I just walked in and said, what the fuck is going on? What's going on in here? What are you doing? And he said, oh, Mark is being interviewed by Reuters. We just discussed this, not even 24 hours ago. And of course that ended up backfiring spectacularly.
That was the first time I'd seen Mark, was the picture of him on the ball. And immediately I looked at the whole aesthetic of this larger gentleman sitting on this ball and thinking, this is not putting forth a message of trust in us.
We would try to explain to him, Mark, don't bring your pizza into this meeting with this important customer, or Mark, stop playing with the robot now, it's time to do some work, and he would just ignore you and keep playing with his toy.
There was no CTO, there was no COO, it was just Mark at the top, and then pretty much everyone else.
It was like the widest, shortest pyramid ever.
Pas forcément évident de gérer une société avec plein de personnes différentes qui ont chacun leurs atouts, etc.
Et leur manière aussi de comprendre les autres et de communiquer.
Moi-même étant pas forcément très doué pour communiquer avec les gens, j'ai essayé de voir comment les gens communiquent entre eux, et c'est extrêmement compliqué.
Donc, pour être manager, c'est pas évident, quoi.
Non, c'est pas évident du tout. Gérer des humains, C'est beaucoup plus compliqué que de gérer des serveurs. Franchement.
My first, official full-time day at Mt.GOX was quite interesting as well. I remember arriving, and then it was sort of one of the executives just plonked a bunch of papers on my desk and said, okay, we're involved in like several sort of legal issues right now. Can you like read these documents and summarize them for us? And at the time I remember thinking, legal issues, number one, and number two, like, shouldn't this be given to the lawyer?
People crying, people not knowing what's going on, people backstabbing in there, people who would come and go, the guy with the big swirly scarf around, these stories about Neil throwing stuff at the walls and shouting matches, and all of the stuff that was going on there.
Every day it's like, you walk in there and you're like, I can't believe, like this.
Oh, that's we banned that phrase. We just thought this is the cream on the top. That chaos, we just thought, no one's going to keep their job here. I felt eventually we'll just be replaced. They'll grow so big, they'll need a global agency to handle everything that they're doing, but this will be a great story.
Ah, ignorance is bliss. A bliss so complete it makes you forget your obligations. Obligations like, compliance with US government regulations. I need that chair, buddy. Excuse me. Just a few weeks after the new laws were passed in the States, the government seized $5 million from Mt.GOX's accounts. Now, in and of itself, not a big deal for a company of this size. But little did they know, shit was about to get a whole lot worse.
Après la saisie, on a commencé donc tout de suite à rentrer en contact avec les procureurs aux États-Unis qui ont opéré la saisie pour essayer de discuter avec eux et de voir de quelles questions. Et les premières questions qu'ils ont eues, c'était au sujet de Silk Road.
Mt.GOX, and they weren't doing this from the start, they were supposed to take 2 forms of ID, bank account information, all these things to verify who the users are. It makes a good strategy for law enforcement. If you can get everyone roped into this one central database, then you just take that database and go after the criminals.
Alors, les négociations qu'on a eues donc avec le DHS et avec les procureurs américains étaient en particulier au sujet de fournir des informations donc, sur Silk Road et sur les comptes que le DHS pensait liés à Silk Road, en échange donc de nous rendre ces 5 millions de dollars. En ce qui concerne donc tout ce qui est collaboration avec la police, etc., je suis, disons, pas particulièrement libertarien ni rien du tout. De mon côté, j'ai jamais vraiment eu de problème. C'est pas vraiment le cas. Disons plutôt que j'ai jamais vraiment eu d'opposition au système de police, etc. Donc, je ne vois pas de raison de ne pas coopérer.
Following the Department of Homeland Security investigation and the seizure of our accounts in the US, Japanese banking partners freaked out. I remember seeing the executives from the banks visiting our office more and more frequently, and then over time they imposed limits, in terms of the amount of transactions we could do with them per day, in terms of the currencies that we could actually be dealing with, and which eventually enabled us to survive as a business only on enabling transfers in Japanese yen domestically. And when you consider that more than 95% of our customers at the time weren't based in Japan and weren't transacting in Japanese yen, this is a major blow to how we could operate.
The only way to send people money was from the post office. That was it.
On planifiait nos virements. Donc on commandait auprès de Museo la somme en liquide. Et le jour venu, on récupérait le liquide. On se retrouvait avec entre 20 et 70 millions de yens en liquide. Ça fait entre 200 et 700 000 euros. Donc on prenait nos petits sacs, bien lourds, remplis de liquide. Et on remontait la rue, direction opposée à Shibuya, jusqu'à la poste.
Mark, to his credit, busted his ass trying to send money to people. People did get withdrawals, just real slow.
We wanted to communicate and say the banks are screwing us, but we couldn't say that, right? Because then the bank could easily just shut down all of our accounts and we would be screwed. We wouldn't have any banking partner in Japan. Our hands were kind of tied in many situations where we wanted to communicate.
I was concerned when there started being fiat withdrawal delays at Mt.GOX, so I agreed to make a video for them, and I wrote the words myself. I read my own script, and I chose my words very, very carefully. And even to this day, everything I said in that video is true. I regret having made it for them.
I'm Roger Veer, longtime Bitcoin advocate and investor. Today, I'm at the Mt.GOX World Headquarters in Tokyo, Japan. I had a nice chat with Mt.GOX CEO Mark Karpelès about their current situation.
I saw that he had over $100 million in their bank account. That's a lot of money. And then he showed me a letter from the same bank that all that money was held in, and that letter from the same bank told them that they're allowed to send 10 international wires per day, and they're allowed to send about the equivalent of $1 million domestically per day. Obviously, that's not enough for a business of Mt.GOX's size to keep up with the demands of their customers.
I'm sure that all the current withdrawal problems at Mt.GOX are being caused by the traditional banking system, not because of a lack of liquidity at Mt.GOX. For now, I hope everyone will continue working on Bitcoin projects that will help make the world a better place.
I discovered Bitcoin in 2013. In April 2013, the market for Bitcoin just went crazy. It went from $20 to $240 within a space of 2 weeks. And the price was jumping up and down by 50% or double every day. At that point, I realized, okay, trading is what I want to do. So I gave up my freelance work and I started trading full-time.
In March 2013, there were bank runs in Cyprus, and that's when the price of Bitcoin first spiked. It went to about $160, and I was really kicking myself. If I had just, made a simple investment at $10, right, I could have made a ton of money. And that's when I said, that's it. I'm going to find a good time to buy, and I'm not going to look back. And I wired Mt.GOX some money, and then I was in the game.
So there was a period of amazing excitement towards the second half of 2013. Bitcoin was going up from, it was hanging around 100, 140 for a while, then it stayed around 200 for a bit, and then it just started shooting up. Nobody was really sure why.
And then the Silk Road bust happened. That's when I got kind of nervous. And there was a lot of speculation in the forums by people about, well, is the price going to collapse? What's going to happen to the volume on the exchange? And I think some people started selling. This was, I believe, the end of October. And I just held. And sure enough, when November happened, when November 1st hit, the price started to go up. And that whole month of November, it didn't stop. And I had held the whole time, and I just kept holding. I put my money on Mt.GOX to do some trading. Quickly realized that I had no idea what the hell the market was doing, and I shouldn't be trading. I just held and watched it go up.
It was just rising like crazy, so went 120, 240, and it just kept going up and up and up, and suddenly it was at $1,000.
I'd be in front of my computer just kind of cheering on the price. It was great. I go to the gym to work out, and I couldn't stop looking at my phone, right, tracking what was happening. It was a wild ride. And so at the end of that month, November, I think the price was around $1,200 or something. I didn't really want to sell my Bitcoins yet, but I wanted to get them back off Mt.GOX after trading. I asked for the coins back, and it was a slow response.
It was actually my birthday. I remember it very clearly. I was in Paris in a hotel. I don't know why, but I was thinking I really should withdraw my Bitcoins from Mt.GOX. I went to my computer and started a withdrawal, and I checked an hour later, and they hadn't come out.
They told me I needed to verify my account, which they never asked for before when just dealing in Bitcoin. To receive a bank wire, they'd want it. And that's when things started to go downhill.
Customers were getting angrier and angrier. Sometimes, even myself, I would be given transferred calls, from people who would just shout and insult me on the phone. And that's when I started to look for, an exit or a way out, because I realized that things were going to get crazy. Yeah.
Up until early 2014, Mark had been able to say, I can't get dollars or yen through to you because of these limits that they're imposing on me. But once people couldn't take their Bitcoins out, that pointed to a much more fundamental problem, because if he had the Bitcoins, he could have sent them immediately.
And a couple of days later, I woke up and I already knew I had to go there. I think my mind had decided while I was asleep, you must go to Japan. There was a snowstorm that day in Tokyo. There was literally an igloo on the street of Mt.GOX. It was freezing. I went down there. The street was almost empty. I pulled out my sign and I felt monumentally stupid. And then Karpelès suddenly starts walking up the street. The journalists start scrambling to get their video cameras out. And then I try and stop Karpelès to talk to him. He has clearly no interest in talking to me.
Okay, I came all the way from London, to try and get my Bitcoins from you to find out what's happening.
No problem with Bitcoin. We can't do anything right now.
He started launching into the standard response. Oh, sorry, that is not possible. There are technical problems. But I, of course, as a techie, I knew that that a technical problem wouldn't stop them giving Bitcoins back.
So do you still have the Bitcoin? Do you still have everyone's Bitcoin?
He was pretty concerned about that question. Eventually, he pushed past, got into the building and said, don't come inside.
That was I don't expect their company's going to last much longer. I think it's about to collapse. And I expect that no one's going to get their money back, but we'll see.
By that time, I just left Tokyo, actually, and had relocated back to Hong Kong. This was in early February 2014. And I remember a friend of mine who was aware of what was going on with Mt.GOX called me directly and said, remove like any mention of Mt.GOX from your LinkedIn profile. And then I asked him, like, okay, why? He said, like, just don't ask any questions. Just do it.
Mt.GOX unexpectedly shut down today.
One of the world's biggest Bitcoin exchanges has filed for bankruptcy.
Faillite retentissante du système d'échange de Bitcoins.
La plataforma de la moneda virtual Bitcoin MTGox se declara en quiebra.
The scale of it was just so absurd.
Mt.GOX.
Mt.GOX hundreds of millions of pounds and prompting the sharp fall in the value of the currency.
I felt like I had been punched in the stomach and I couldn't believe that.
Que es posible que haya sufrido el robo de todos los bitcoins que gestionaba a causa de un ataque informático.
What the fuck? Like, what do you mean that there's like no Bitcoin? What do you mean that we're missing this many Bitcoin?
How could you lose 800,000 Bitcoin?
T'as un coffre principal dans une banque. Généralement, quand tu l'ouvres, tu t'attends à trouver une montagne d'or et puis là, t'as juste 3 grammes de sable dans un coin. C'est pas... Il y a un problème, quoi.
You can't lose all of them before you notice. That just seemed absolutely insane.
If he had said, like, oh, we lost a few $1 million, like, you lost a few $1 million? Are you kidding me? Now, tell someone that you just lost, like, $800 million. $1 billion. Like, at the peak, it was $1 billion, isn't well over it now, and see how they react. This is the problem with this whole thing in general, is that people really got fucked on this, right? Like, really badly. I think people lost their life savings. People lost loads and loads of money. And I don't want to be seen as making light of this in any way, but it's just so absurd.
I had just over 300 Bitcoins in Mt.GOX, which before they crashed the price would have been worth about $300,000. Of course, after they crashed the price, it was worth less than half that. At the time that the bankruptcy announcement was made, I had been traveling around with some journalists, and we stopped around the Mt.GOX office, and they heard word from some of their fellow journalists that there was a big announcement about to be made.
at his press conference in Japan. I think he was wearing a dark suit, and I remember there being a lot of microphones. And the thing that I took away from it was him bowing a lot, and which I guess is customary in Japanese business culture. If you make a mistake, that you kind of make a big kind of public showing of saying you're sorry and apologizing.
Sur le moment, l'émotion ne me permettait pas de prononcer le moindre mot. J'ai été obligé de faire beaucoup d'efforts pour réussir à juste prononcer les quelques mots que j'ai préparés et répétés dans ma tête pendant 30 minutes.
システムに弱いところがあって、ビットコインがいなくなって、みんなにの結果でご迷惑をかけてしまって、本当に申し訳ありませんと思います。
C'était un petit peu le point culminant de tous ces 3 ans de stress. C'est-à-dire qu'après 3 ans, le pire qui pouvait se passer s'est produit et je me retrouve face à je ne sais pas combien de caméras et de journalistes en train d'annoncer au monde entier que voilà, c'est fini, que j'ai pas été à la mesure de faire ce que j'étais en train de faire.
Et c'est quoi le pire là-dedans? C'est les caméras, c'est de devoir dire que t'as pas été à la mesure de... C'est quoi?
C'est de faire face, en fait, à ses propres... mes propres... Comment dire? Mes propres limitations.
Parce que t'avais pas voulu les voir avant ou...
Non, c'est... Comment dire? Je sais pas exactement comment... Mais...
If people really want to know what happened, like what's the real story behind it?
Well, we are working on it, but anyway, in the meantime, we are sorry for the troubles caused by this.
After the crash, the Bitcoin, let's say, ecosystem took a major hit in terms of respectability, public perception. Even like for me personally, I thought, okay, well, Bitcoin is dead. Like, there's no way that any governments or banks will tolerate something like this happening again.
There's no insurance in Bitcoin. There's no government backing for Bitcoin. And obviously, you know, early on, that was the whole allure of this thing, was there's no government meddling in this. But as soon as there were losses, people realized, oh, there's also no government to back this up. When I get my Bitcoin stolen, they're gone. That's it. That's the end.
During the first half of 2014, a lot of people started investigating this and seeing if there was anything that could be done. Well, there are probably 2 reasons for why it can be really hard to trace Bitcoin, despite it being inherently traceable. First, in the case of Mt.GOX, purely scale. Mt.GOX had an immense number of Bitcoin addresses. It's too large for a human to easily see because there's just so much information to take in. The other problem is that if you deposit a Bitcoin to a service like Mt.GOX, and if you withdraw that Bitcoin later, it's not necessarily the same Bitcoin. You might have gotten a different Bitcoin deposited by some other customer. As a result, when a Bitcoin is deposited to one of these places, you can't follow the trail of that particular Bitcoin. I think a lot of people at that point just suspected that someone in Mt.GOX had stolen it. Simply because there was no way to know one way or the other.
I think the best clue of what happened to those Bitcoins is that Mark was able to find 200,000 of them after it was reported that they were missing.
How many people in the history of this world could actually claim that they had accidentally misplaced $200 million? It doesn't chime.
What is wrong with this guy? You found it under your mattress? Like, what are you doing? You're a person who is supposed to be running a company. You're a person who's supposed to have experience in security. You're a person who's supposed to be very knowledgeable about Bitcoin. It was baffling to understand like how you could just lose that much money and then just find it again magically after the fact.
Is this PG-13 language I can only use here, or people were really pissed at him, and people hated him?
I always felt that he didn't really get the gravity of the situation.
It was just terrifying to read what was going on.
こんにちは。今日はうちの特製のアップルパイの作り方を説明します。
The question everyone wanted to know is, where are the Bitcoins? What happened to them? And at some point, he went onto Twitter and he started tweeting about things like, oh, the sunrise in Tokyo was nice today. Everyone was still in limbo, waiting for him to say what had happened to this $500 million. And he's talking about the weather in Tokyo.
で、このまま1時間、2時間ぐらいそれるの待たないといけないんですけど、とっても。
I had been working at the law firm. This guy came to us who was a former Mt.GOX employee, Nils Artestad. He had a lot of information about Mt.GOX, so he was very interesting to us because he could give us a lot of insight. And if Mark had done something criminal, he was going to, be a good source to help us learn about it and help us prove it. And so he had this story about Mark giving him a death threat. I went with him. I walked with him back to the Mt.GOX office. I kind of looked around with him. But I believed his story. I did. And he seemed credible. There was some woman from some Bitcoin company who died, right? She was in Singapore. I think she fell off a building. And there was rumors online that maybe that was somehow connected. I went and had my apartment, my hotel room moved from like the 10th floor to the 2nd floor in case I had to get out easy. It was kind of scary. But yeah, most people speculated that he was a total thief or a crook. And actually, it was really hard to escape that thought. Someone with that amount of money and has a lot to protect, and you hear a story like this, it's believable. And of course, a lot of people speculate.
De 僕たちはこいつ怪しいんじゃないかと。我々週刊誌だけでなくテレビも含めた、かなりの数の報道機関が彼の家の周りを取り囲むようにして、何社もいた状況だったので、彼も家の中から一歩も出ないっていうコンクラベみたいな状況にはなってたんです。
To protect your anonymity, we will reenact this interview. So, do you prefer to be a woman or a man?
A man will be fine. ビットコインというのは一般の読者にとってはなんだか難しくてよくわからない事件でした。彼が外国人であること、太っていること、服装がちょっとだらしないことなど、全部含めてキャラクターがあったということは事実です。メディアとしてはとても表現しやすい人物だったと。すごく家賃が高い、渋谷の高級マンションに住んでたとか、彼の趣味みたいなところをフューチャーした記事です。 あとはカルプレス自体変なところで庶民的というか、コンビニの弁当を好んだりだとか、日本のアニメの無視しを好んだりとか。オタク、このジャパニーズオタク。
Oh, ben regardez, petit rond bébé.
Je peux faire glisser, là?
Ah oui, bien sûr, je vous dis, il n'y a vraiment rien de secret. Bon, on parle de nos chats, on parle un peu de deux, trois choses, mais vraiment rien, il n'y a rien de secret, quoi. Il y a même pas il n'y a même rien d'intime. Nous avons une correspondance à base de photos de chats absolument incroyables. Oui, il y a les photos de Tibane, il y a tout. Donc là, c'est le nouvel appartement. Puis il y a Julia aussi. Il y a Tibane et il y a Julia.
Julia?
C'est l'autre chatte.
C'est un autre chat.
Puis je lui avais envoyé aussi la recette des flûtes fribourgeoises. avec des photos et différents stades de préparation de la flûte bourgeoise. Voilà.
Et qu'est-ce que vous avez pensé la première fois que vous avez appris cette nouvelle?
Première chose que j'ai pensé, qu'est-ce que Robert a à faire là-dedans? Enfin, Marc a à faire là-dedans. Et puis après ça, en creusant, j'ai découvert que mon fils était en fait le PDG de MTGox.
I have been in contact with Mark Karpelès a few times, but our conversations have been very brief. Sometimes when I've asked him direct questions, he hasn't responded at all or has responded in a very elusive way. We were able to reach his mother. She herself said that she had no information from him. You know, it's a bit strange that he doesn't seem to have anybody who he really trusts or who he communicates with. He doesn't communicate with his family. He's divorced from his wife. He doesn't seem to have any allies, as far as I can tell.
He lived in this world of hackers where you proved your worth through your code. You didn't prove it through, you know, what you wore or what you said. You did it by what you typed into a computer.
Il a été déterminé, testé, mesuré, si je puis dire, comme surdoué. Bon, ça n'a pas été facile parce que j'ai été toute seule. J'ai toujours essayé d'être avec lui autant que je pouvais. Il a fait comme tous les surdoués ont dû faire, composer. Et ça, j'ai toujours veillé à ce qu'il fasse l'équilibre et qu'il ne soit jamais seul. Parce que j'ai aussi vécu ça. C'est trop facile de s'isoler complètement dans le monde des adultes, de s'intéresser plus qu'à des sujets d'adultes, de plus avoir un seul copain. Et puis quand vous sortez dans la rue, vous avez l'impression d'être au milieu des extraterrestres. Parce que vous êtes tellement pris dans un sujet et un seul, tellement développé dans ce sujet, que le reste finit par ne plus exister.
3 or 4 times his wife came to the office crying and begging Mark to spend time with his son. And he just ignored her until she left. Mark is a very strange person. It's easy to believe that maybe he has some sort of mental illness, Asperger's, or some other social disability.
He is not like most people, and he doesn't sort of have the human emotional range that you expect of most people. He's kind of a still character, and so I think it's easy to kind of imagine him as sort of non-human form because he just doesn't have a lot of the human traits that you expect.
Il a conscience de ne pas réagir aux conventions sociales comme on s'attend de lui et du coup, il s'adapte en conséquence. T'es jamais sûr si c'est lui qui joue un peu un rôle ou si c'est réellement sa manière à lui de répondre à cette situation.
Je connais moins bien Marc que je ne connais Robert, je dirais. Robert, c'est le petit garçon que j'ai élevé. Et Marc est un homme complet, fait, marié, divorcé, père de famille. Donc en fait, il a fait un peu comme on faisait jadis au Japon, justement, de changer de prénom quand il s'est marié. Ou quand il est passé à ce qu'on pourrait appeler l'âge adulte.
He moved to Japan seemingly because he was just interested in sort of the Japanese culture. For some reason, he just sort of fell down this rabbit hole of being interested in Japan and wanting to live in Japan, and really took to that.
Karpels さん知ってますよ。お弁当気に入ってくれて毎日いらっしゃって本当の日本人ですね。
優しい子ですよ。私のマキコとも仲が良くてね。あ、マキコ、マクさん優しいよね。
I think Mark loved Japan, but I think Mark was still in the, you know, everything is sparkly and shiny in Japan is wonderful phase of his life. Oh. I mean, this is a guy who used to leave his computer on a park bench, right? and was amazed that people in Japan would bring it back. Not everyone is so kind. But I don't think he saw what was coming. I think that one of the factors is that because he's not Japanese, and he doesn't have a lot of street sense, I don't think he actually anticipated that I'm going to be grabbed for the failure of this company and be put in jail. And that's a hell of a wake-up call.
Alors d'abord, ils m'ont téléphoné, je crois que c'était vers 5h30 du matin, pour me prévenir qu'ils arrivaient d'ici 20 minutes, une demi-heure. Donc je leur ai dit de prendre leur temps, le temps que je me douche. Puis donc j'ai eu je sais pas combien de policiers qui sont entrés dans la maison, qui ont commencé à prendre des photos à droite à gauche, et ils m'ont lu donc un mandat d'arrestation.
Authorities in Tokyo arrested Mark Karpelès for allegedly falsifying financial records in the Mt.GOX computer system by $1 million in 2013.
D'accord, donc on t'accuse d'avoir créé $1 million dans la base de données qui était factice. Ça correspond à quoi?
Ces $1 million, en fait, correspondent à une partie de l'activité du bot Willy.
警察の審査が始まる前に一部の人たちがウィリーボットというのを見つけて審査リポートを書いたんです。ウィリーと名付けられたアカウントはずっとコンスタントにビットコインを買い続けて、これは何なのかと関心が集まりました。このウィリーボットというアカウントがビットコインがどんどんなくなったことの主犯だと僕も考えていますし、警察も考えています。一番の問題はこのウィリーボットが誰のアカウントだったということ。実はマークしかこのウィリーボットにアクセスできる権限がなかった。警察がこれに気づいたのがマークを犯人だとする決め手でした。
Yes, indeed, there's strong evidence that this was indeed a bot running at Mt.GOX and doing these trades. And furthermore, he was running without any real money backing it. So definitely fraudulent. This was clearly a very interesting phenomenon, a very suspicious phenomenon, and a strong candidate for what could have happened to the Bitcoins. But if you look at the later parts of Willy, in 2014, it suddenly flips around, and instead of fraudulently buying lots and lots of Bitcoins, it seems to be just selling them back to the same Bitcoin market and roughly the same amount that it initially bought. It would sort of cancel each other out, or at the very least, it made us think that maybe this isn't the whole answer, maybe there's something else.
650万のビットコインがなくなった責任はマークにあります。彼が逮捕されないことはありえないでしょう。
I think it makes for a very gratifying villain in this case. He's slightly odd and quirky. He seems out of place, as here's this normal, socially awkward geek that runs one of the biggest Bitcoin companies ever, should be swimming in money. And of course it makes for a great story if he is also some sort of a master villain that steals all the Bitcoin and makes everyone think someone else did it. So yeah, I think he just makes sense from a narrative point of view that paint him as the villain. It makes perfect sense for a detective story, but maybe not in reality.
Tu es coupable d'avoir volé les 650 000 bitcoins?
Clairement pas.
As-tu volé l'argent de tes clients?
Non.
Willybot est-il responsable de la disparition des bitcoins?
Non plus.
Qui a créé Willybot?
Willybot, à la base, fait partie de MTGox, donc avant que je prenne la main sur MTGox.
Mais qui opérait Willybot de 2011 à 2013?
De 2011 à 2013, donc, c'était moi. Et avant, c'était Jed.
You know, Japan is a wonderful place. The Japanese justice system is fucked up. Japanese prosecutors are not interested in a fair trial. They're not interested in justice. So Karpelès' mistake may have been that he believed the system is about justice. No, it's about finding someone to take the blame and getting them convicted, and then moving on. The police thought that if they arrest him on some charges, that he would confess. But he didn't confess. And thus they kept rearresting him and rearresting him. He still didn't confess. And I think by the time this whole trial is gone over, you still won't know what happened to the missing Bitcoins. And that's what really everybody cares about.
それに私どもがいろいろその調査した限りでも、なくなったビットコインと今回の起訴とは無関係であると。我々冒頭で申し上げた通り、これが犯罪だということはもちろん一切認めていません。
Obviously, Mark Karpelès has been arrested for one charge and for one another and for one another. Is it something common in the Japanese system?
新しいクレームというか、嫌疑を追加していくことはよくあることです。
If bitcoins had not disappeared, Mark wouldn't have been arrested, right?
それはそうじゃないですか。
To me, it looked like the authorities just wanted to get rid of this thing, right? And in Japan, there's something like a 99.7% conviction rate because they arrest you and you'll go to jail and then you'll plea bargain, right? You just accept it. And that's what happened to Mark. He was pre-trial detainee for months.
Donc à la base, comme je dis, c'était pas supposé durer aussi longtemps. Enfin, c'est pas supposé. Parce que j'imaginais, 3 semaines de visite pour voir un petit peu comment ça marche dans un commissariat et puis après je peux rentrer chez moi. J'étais donc en mode observation, je regardais les gens autour de moi, je regardais les installations. J'ai même fait des plans du centre de détention. J'ai noté aussi un peu les histoires de toutes les personnes que j'ai rencontrées.
Donc c'était pas des vacances, mais c'était tiens, on va voir, ça va être.
Oui, c'est voir une face du Japon que j'avais jamais vue jusqu'à présent.
Can you imagine when the police interrogated him? That they probably wanted to go home and commit suicide. Like, it'd be the most frustrating interrogation ever. You know, it's like 23 days detainment in Japan without even having a lawyer or without a phone call or anything. They hold you like 23 days. And so, you know, by the time 23 days comes up, like, they've deprived you of sleep, they've slapped you around. 23 days is way long enough for bruises to heal, for example. And if they could have made him a punching bag every day and he just would have been, it's like stone cold. Like, because he just wouldn't have like reacted to it.
Did they charge him with something else so that they could keep him for another 23 days after that?
Yeah, Mark said, actually, they said, his lawyer said before, well, when you walk out, they're just going to arrest you again. Okay. So he just like walked, he was released, he walked into the lobby, they arrested him again and brought him back inside.
C'est vrai que les Japonais sont restés dans la loi. Ils ont mis des chefs d'accusation au fur et à mesure qui ont permis de prolonger la garde à vue, qui est déjà très longue par rapport à celle que nous connaissons en France. Parce qu'en France, il me semble que c'est 48 heures de garde à vue. Hein. Là, c'est 20 jours. Plus les 3 premiers jours où on n'est pas vraiment de la garde à vue, c'est le temps qu'on étaye l'accusation. Voilà. Qui peuvent être prolongés une fois, mais pas 2. Donc ça veut dire 43 jours de garde à vue. C'est énorme. Puis s'il y a un nouveau chef d'accusation, c'est de nouveau 43 jours possibles. Voilà comment il est resté aussi longtemps au commissariat. Et donc le juge a commué ça en mise au secret, donc dans une prison et non plus au commissariat. Pendant toute cette période de détention, on a pensé qu'il allait sortir, puis il n'est pas sorti. On ne pouvait pas communiquer avec lui. Je viens seulement maintenant d'avoir l'autorisation de lui écrire et éventuellement d'aller le voir. Éventuellement. Comme je ne suis même pas sûr qu'on ne va pas me fermer la porte au nez si je vais au Japon, eh ben j'y vais pas. De toute façon, je sais pas très bien ce que je ferai.
I think it's a very big and complicated case. It has many parts. It's not something where you instantly grasp what the entire case is about. To some extent, it might be the same for the police in that the case is so big and complicated that you'd forgive them for going for something that looks a bit easier first. Like Mark Karpelès is being accused of embezzlement and misappropriation. And to the police, these are probably the first things that you would find that you might actually be able to prosecute him for, because other parts of the case, like the missing bitcoins, are so big and huge that you would have to invest large resources into investigating them, and you might never find a crime. It might not be who you thought it was, for example, and then that amount of time would be wasted. So from their point of view, you would go for the low-hanging fruit first.
日本の検察は一般的に何を訴えるかっていうのを決めるのは検察官なんですね。だからその全ての例えば疑いが10あったら10の中から訴えやすいっていうと言い方があれですけども、その立証が可能なものを例えば1とか2を選んでやるので。
I was really concerned that there would be a real risk that this might not be investigated thoroughly because there might not be the necessary expertise in the correct place in the police, or they might not be able to find the right people because it might require some on-the-street skills, and you might need to know the right people to hear this or that rumor, or just purely a question of technical expertise. That's when we sort of decided that we have to look at the blockchain, we have to try and match it, even though it's a huge amount of data, we have to try to attack it somehow. If indeed all the money had been stolen at once, it should have been very easy to discover the transactions through which it moved. The problem was that there was no such single transaction. It seemed to have been that between autumn of 2011 and towards up to the middle or even the end of 2013, there were bitcoins stolen in chunks over time, almost continuously. Throughout that entire period, we have no idea exactly how they were gotten into the systems, maybe some combination of social engineering or just plain hacking or compromised code or something. But first and foremost, to do this particular theft, you need patience because they've been doing it over years and quite slowly and deliberately and been quite careful in how to move the bitcoins out afterwards.
Si le vol a eu lieu depuis 2011, comment est-ce possible que personne à MTGox n'ait rien vu?
C'est une excellente question.
MTGox, at several times in the past, distinctly suggested that they had a very strong security system. They had very properly designed cold storage, and this suggested that their security would have been good, and they thought very deeply about these things. But you don't need to steal the cold storage necessarily if you just keep draining the hot wallet. And this works only as long as no one at MTGox is actually monitoring how much money is in the cold storage, how much goes in, how much goes out.
Pourquoi ne pas monitorer ce qui rentre dans le cold wallet?
Parce que ça voudrait dire qu'on monitorerait les adresses qui font partie du cold wallet. Donc si tu scannes les cold wallets avec un ordinateur qui est branché à Internet pour accéder, pour vérifier combien il y a sur les adresses, du coup tes cold wallets ne sont plus des cold wallets, mais qui passent par un ordinateur qui est connecté.
D'accord. Donc en fait, le système que tu mets en place, c'est un système qui est aveugle.
C'est en tout cas comme ça qu'on en est arrivé. C'est les recommandations de sécurité qui ont été définies, comme je dis, lorsqu'on a défini ce processus.
Et est-ce que finalement, la priorité de sécurité a été mise au bon endroit? Parce que là, le fait d'être aveugle, ça veut dire que s'il y avait une faille dans ton système, tout s'écroulait. C'est ce qui s'est passé d'ailleurs.
Oui, en grande partie, oui, mais...
If these people are to be caught, then it'll be because they made some mistake of how they used Bitcoin or who they sent it to or something like that. If they did it flawlessly, then there's a good chance they might never be found.
Even if they find the person who's responsible for the collapse of Mt.GOX and the missing funds and the bankruptcy, that doesn't necessarily mean that Mark will go free.
The system doesn't want to lose face. They see something clearly went wrong. Someone has to pay some kind of price.
So I think right now they're at this point where they're trying to figure out, well, what are we going to do about this? They're buying time. I think they're still trying to build their case.
やはりマルクがなかなかこう普通では計り知れないぐらいの才能の持ち主であるので、彼がこのデジタル技術を使って何をするかわからないじゃないかと、そういう畏怖感を持たれていて、そうであるがゆえにですね、新しい証拠を作るんじゃないかとか、でその部分でやっぱりもしかするとこういうふうに長期化しているのかもしれないなという気は我々はしています。今一番僕らが不便感じているのは、検察側からMt.GOXのデータを開示受けた時に 僕らの手の中に分析できる人がいないっていうことですね。一番ベストの分析をしうる人っていうのはマルクですから。
Préparer ma défense en prison, c'était pas évident, surtout au début où je n'avais aucun document sur le procès. Mais après avoir été transféré au centre de détention à Tokyo, j'ai dû recevoir quelque chose comme 15 000 à 20 000 pages. Dans le lot, il y avait une partie importante, ou du moins qui me semble importante, c'est que je suis accusé dans du détournement de fonds sur la base que ce que MTGox aurait eu comme profit aurait pas suffi à couvrir les dépenses et les pertes. Et ça m'a semblé bizarre. Et donc j'ai commencé à comparer les chiffres et à faire des calculs. Et ça a pris pas mal de temps, mais je suis arrivé à la conclusion qu'il manquait pas mal de profit dans ce que la police avait calculé.
僕らが差し入れをしているのほか入れてる方眼紙っていうのかな、紙に書いてあるペーパーベースの数字を全部手で計算して、全部カリキュレートしてですね、それをグラフにしてですね、一生懸命自分をディフェンスするためのいろんな分析を紙を何枚も起こしてもう大量の計算してこれに送ってくれてます。
Comme outil, tout ce que j'avais, c'était une calculatrice que j'ai réussi à commander dans le centre de détention. Ils ont failli d'ailleurs me donner à la place un Solovan.
Un boulier?
Oui.
Ils t'ont donné un boulier pour faire tes
Non,
calculs?
ils ont failli. En fait, dans les règles de base de la prison, c'est en cas de besoin de calcul, il est possible de commander un boulier. Sauf que, a priori, je ne sais pas si c'est récent ou pas, mais il était devenu possible de commander une calculatrice et non un boulier. Donc je suis parti avec la calculatrice au final.
C'est mieux.
Oui.
一番優秀なコンピューターここの中あるから、まあ外になくてもですね、できる限りこれでできる計算は大量に彼はこなしてます。
Alors en fait, ce qui se passe, c'est que donc j'ai sorti différents éléments pour montrer que la comptabilité de la police était fausse et qu'il y avait au moins quelques centaines de millions d'yens en plus qui n'a pas été compté, mais c'est juste une partie. En réalité, il manque encore plus que ça.
今の段階では本当にそういう意味で我々としてはマルクの保釈を早く実現することがマルクの弁護のためには必須不可欠だとは思っています。
Pour que les procureurs puissent gagner de façon sûre, il leur faut que j'ai été capable de me défendre. Et pour que j'ai été capable de me défendre, il faut qu'il n'ait pas fait obstruction à ma défense. En l'occurrence, effectivement, MTGox, ça c'est 10 millions de transactions, c'est un volume de données énorme. Quelque chose qui n'est clairement pas traitable à la main. Et donc, le fait que les procureurs refusent, par exemple, de me donner l'accès à un ordinateur, pourrait vouloir dire simplement qu'ils m'ont empêché de me défendre correctement. Et auquel cas, l'affaire peut être refaite de zéro. Et ça pourrait les embêter.
ビットコイン取引所マウントゴックスの元社長マルク・カルプレス被告は今日午後東京拘置所から保釈されました。
On fait crypter ces trucs.
Non, ça.
Donc c'est-à-dire que n'importe qui avec un récepteur radio peut savoir ce qu'on dit.
Sans doute. Alors là, pour le coup, j'en sais rien.
Oui, bah, clairement. Hein.
De toute façon, je ne serai pas vraiment libre tant que le procès ne sera pas fini. On va dire que pour l'instant, je préfère éviter de débarquer dans un parc ou dans des lieux publics où je risque d'être connu. Au moins jusqu'à ce que j'ai récupéré un peu de force. Parce que j'ai toujours mon os cassé qui est en train de se refaire là. Et ma blessure qui n'est pas encore entièrement soignée. Mais...
Qu'est-ce qui t'est arrivé?
Un petit truc. On va dire juste que j'ai quand même sur les 1 an que j'ai passé derrière les barreaux, il y a un moment où j'ai fini par péter un câble. Et ça m'a valu une main, un os cassé et 2-3 petites blessures. Bon, pas grand-chose. Mais... En gros, j'ai pu tester qui était le plus fort entre mon poing et une porte en acier. Et mon poing a perdu.
J'imagine que pendant la prison, tu t'es fait un plan de ce que tu allais faire en sortant.
Oui, j'ai fait tout un tas de plans en fait. J'avais entre autres un plan d'acheter un vieux bus et de le réaménager en une sorte de camping-car géant avec des panneaux solaires. Et le problème, c'est qu'en fait, vu que je suis libéré sous caution, j'ai une obligation de vivre à une adresse précise et de notifier la cour si je déménage ou si par exemple je pars en vacances. Donc du coup, ça veut dire que si je veux faire ce genre de muse, je pourrais pas l'utiliser avant un certain temps, c'est un peu dommage.
Où est-ce que tu as merdé pour en arriver finalement à te prendre un an de tôle
Je pense que d'abord, la première chose, c'est lors de l'acquisition de MTGox. L'offre initiale de MTGox, c'est pas d'argent initialement payé, juste 6 mois où on partage moitié-moitié les revenus, et puis après 12% départ. Sur ce coup-là, oui, j'ai complètement... j'aurais dû voir le machin, il est gros comme une maison. Le truc, c'est que ça faisait déjà pas mal de temps que j'ai des JED sur du développement et d'autres trucs. Donc je me suis pas attendu à ce qu'il me balance une pourriture comme ça dans la gueule.
There's a lot of suspects in the collapse of Mt.GOX. And of course, Mark is a great suspect himself. However, you know, if you're trying to figure out what happened to this company, where did the money go, where are the missing bitcoins, I'm just suggesting that there's a lot of people that we would look at. I don't think the police have contacted them, honestly, because it's a pain in the ass. We got a giant envelope full of papers. Looked like it had been sent from close to where the police headquarters were, of all these documents relating to Mt.GOX and the buyout and the takeover. And amongst those documents, which was probably like 400 pages, was this back and forth between Mark and Jed, the original owner of Mt.GOX, in which basically Jed is saying, oh, you know, I forgot to tell you that we're missing about 80,000 bitcoins. There's a whole bunch of different ways you could sort of make up the difference. Good luck. Mark is just thinking he's getting, you know, a wonderful deal on like a solid gold horse, but he doesn't know that it's basically a Trojan horse that's painted gold.
L'offre était vraiment intéressante et il m'a semblé être une mauvaise idée d'enquêter plus et de perdre du temps et de risquer de perdre cette offre. Et du coup, je l'ai directement accepté sans me renseigner et savoir qu'est-ce qui motivait réellement le fait qu'on propose de reprendre MTGox sans avoir rien payé de base, enfin avec des conditions qui étaient quand même extrêmement intéressantes.
In English, we usually say a fall guy. You know, someone to take the heat, someone to take the rap. A fall guy, a sacrificial lamb. I mean, there's many ways you could say it. It's like, oh, I got this company. It's really indebted. If I don't get myself out of this hole, it could be a real problem. Oh, but here's this guy who wants it. So if he signs up and takes it on, he takes on all the debt too. So it's all Mark's problem. We have tried to reach Jed McCaleb several times. Nobody seems to be able to find Jed. And we know that he's alive, hopefully.
Running a business is a lot of responsibility, right? And this is one of the things that I explicitly did not want to have here, right? Because there is a lot of risk in this kind of business. There's regulatory risk. There's like, people are always going to try to be hacking you and stuff like this. It's like, it's a kind of headache that I didn't want to have, right? So I explicitly looked for somebody else to assume this responsibility. Mark purported himself to be this like security expert, so he seemed like he'd done like lots of stuff with banks before. It just seemed like he would actually be a good person to run Mt.GOX.
I don't think Jed just wanted a fall guy. I think he wanted Mt.GOX to actually work. That's why he kept 12%. If he just wanted a fall guy, he just sold the whole thing off. Jed wanted some benefit without all the risk. That's what it was.
The Bitcoin loss actually happened after he took over. Like, basically, I gave him access to all the servers, and then like a week later or something like that, there was someone compromised them and was able to steal like from our hot wallet, essentially. 80,000 Bitcoin sounds like a tremendous amount now, and it is a tremendous amount right now, but back then it wasn't a big deal, right? So,
when Mark bought the company or got the company, that was 80,000 Bitcoins worth maybe $20,000. That's a doable debt. But 2 months later, when the price of Bitcoin surged up, that is an $800,000 debt. And that is not something that Mark had. That may have been the birth of Willybot.
Willybot, il va essayer de racheter cette dette petit à petit.
En gros, l'idée, c'est que MTGox, au début, manquait de Bitcoin. Et donc, dans le cas où la valeur du Bitcoin augmente, ça veut dire que la dette voit aussi sa valeur augmenter. Et pour stabiliser la dette, l'idée était de transformer donc la dette Bitcoin en dette dénominée en dollars, par exemple. Auquel cas, cette dette-là est plus stable.
Concrètement, pourquoi ne pas avoir dit à tes clients qu'il y avait un bot qui tournait et pourquoi ne pas avoir été transparent là-dessus?
C'était une des conditions initiales lors de l'achat de MTGox. Et ce type d'activité devait rester jusqu'à ce que le trou soit couvert au moins secrète. Et donc la seule solution, c'est de limiter le nombre de personnes qui sont au courant.
Buyer agrees to indemnify seller against any legal action taken against buyer or seller with regards to MTGox.com or anything acquired under this agreement. Okay, well, it just says that Mark's going to indemnify Jed if any action is taken against, against Jed regarding MTGox.
It's not non-disclosure. I mean, he can talk about whatever he wants to talk about. It's like pretty standard legal clause where, as a seller of something, the buyer indemnifies you to make sure that they're not going to come back to you later and be like, sue you for something that you no longer have control over, right?
Jed had some real experience in the technology world, running things, building things, and I think that gave him a sense of his own limitations.
Run by anyone competent, it would be a billion-dollar business. Like, he totally just screwed it up, right?
Mark had done projects, he'd done real work, but I don't think he had come up against his own limitations. Probably with Bitcoin, he was forced to become at least somewhat aware of them quite quickly, but I think Mark also had an ability to blame others rather than to sort of accept his own role, his own shortcomings.
Some people are good at running a business, some people are good at coding, some people are good at writing, the people have different strengths, right? And it's unfair to expect someone to be able to do all of it, but it's not unfair to realize where your weaknesses are and try to find people that can help you fill in the gaps, right? And I think that's part of being successful is knowing where you need help and you should get people to come help you with, right?
Mark knew, he learned, I think, pretty quickly in the first few months that it was a lemon and what the problems were, and that his passengers in the car, right, the customers, he didn't tell them about those problems, and they ended up getting hurt.
À partir du moment où ces conséquences, tu te rends compte qu'elles ne te concernent plus toi seulement, mais qu'elles concernent des milliers d'utilisateurs, est-ce que tu te dis pas que quelque part t'es pas fait pour ce boulot?
Des moments effectivement où je dois me dire ça. J'ai problème, une fois que j'ai commencé, je me vois dans des situations où je peux pas facilement descendre en marche. C'est-à-dire que MTGox s'est lancé, on est dans une situation où il y a des bitcoins qui ont été volés. On est obligé de faire comme on peut pour que ça tienne. Il y a une partie du fonctionnement dont on ne peut pas parler ouvertement. Et cela fait que donc amener quelqu'un de nouveau pour prendre les choses en main, c'est pas vraiment quelque chose de possible.
Quand tu dis on ne peut pas en parler ouvertement, c'est pas on.
Oui, c'est moi, c'est.
C'est toi tout seul. Tu peux même pas en parler à tes employés?
En final, j'en ai parlé à peu près à personne. Hein.
Donc ce secret des 80 000, pour toi, c'est de là de tout vient?
C'est une partie de ce qui a fait que je suis resté ficelé à cette position.
Est-ce que le fait de ne pas monitorer les bitcoins a quelque chose à voir avec le fait de vouloir cacher cette dette initiale à tes employés?
C'est possible, je ne me souviens plus exactement, mais c'est possible.
Il faut que tu me répondes.
Ça date. Même si on avait gardé des comptes du Bitcoin, je ne pense pas que ça aurait été rendu public, même au sein de la boîte. Donc, je ne sais pas, en fait. Attends.
Est-ce que tu crées un système aveugle pour ne pas avoir à dire à tout le monde qu'il manque des bitcoins?
Je sais pas si c'est conscient ou inconscient, mais c'est fort possible.
How are you?
Oh, pretty good, pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. Good to see you again. Come on in.
Nice to see you.
Over there.
Mt.GOX may have been the most high-profile and devastating incident of its kind when it came crashing down in early 2014, declaring that hundreds of thousands of customer bitcoins worth nearly $500 million had gone missing. And now it's finally time to find out how deep the rabbit hole goes. At least 865,000 bitcoins were lost on the Bitcoin side due to the numerous thefts and incidents over the years. The single by far most damaging act occurred on September 11, 2011, when hackers who had penetrated the main server silently made a copy of the hot wallet private keys. At least 630,000 bitcoins were taken out through these private keys. If you imagine making a small hole in the wall of the bank vault, and it's enough to get your arm in, and you can grab any coins that you can reach. What happened was that throughout Mt.GOX's history over the next few years, enough funds passed through this hole, or within reach of the hackers, that they were able to take all of it until there was literally nothing left. The typical pattern is that the coins are sent from the compromised private keys, and they're sent from those addresses into a new address controlled by the thief. A big majority of all the funds goes to the BTC exchange. Not only is it funded with coins stolen from Mt.GOX, but also coins stolen from other exchanges. As seen in the corner of the graph, other thefts flow into the same network of money laundering. There's stolen coins from Bitcoinica, there's stolen coins from Bitfloor, all moving into the same group. It's possible to connect a lot of this activity to accounts, but of course the hard part would be to then connect that to an actual real-life person, and more to the point, being able to do something with that information. That's not the job of an independent analyst like me. All I can do is dig up the forensic evidence that I can, and then I pass that information along to people who might be able to make a difference with it.
Did your investigation have been related to the Mt.GOX case?
I can't really talk about that right now. It's a hacker group with a connected money laundering.
What is your personal view on the Mt.GOX case, and especially the potential theft of 650,000 bitcoins?
I can't talk about that. And all signs point to Russia as far as I'm concerned.
Do you think we'll ever find the guys who've done this?
I can't talk about that.
So what did you know that you didn't tell us?
Who shot JFK?
Arrested Alexander Winick, accused in Bitcoin billions of dollars fraud, according to BBC. A 38-year-old co-owner of the BTC exchange was arrested in Greece. Winick is accused of more than $4 billion laundering. It is known that he had been charged with 21 counts, including laundering stolen funds from MTGox. No public comments have been received from Alexander Winick. Experts believe that, in general, this situation is even positive for Bitcoin.
Too many people were naive, you know? You have to remember that the early people in the Bitcoin space, they were not sophisticated investors, monetary economists, high-flying financial guys, whatever. They're just really naive code monkeys, really. Just nerds and geeks. Nice people. Plain. So they didn't know. They got robbed. They got robbed.
There are companies that do business in Bitcoin. They have conferences, they have meetings, they wear suits. They exist, I think, in the way that any other tech startup exists. And lots of companies are trying to figure out how to integrate Bitcoin into their operations. It has now become pretty much kind of almost background noise to Silicon Valley.
So our next speaker isn't too much of an introduction. He's been called Bitcoin Jesus.
from the earliest days when I got involved in Bitcoin. 99.9% of the people that were on the first Bitcoin forum there, they all saw the world so similarly to myself and were excited for the same reasons. But this is the next step for Bitcoin. If Bitcoin's gonna grow to influence and change and improve the entire planet, then everybody has to be using it, not just the early libertarians or early computer nerds. We need the businessmen and the bankers, and everybody else has to be involved. We need everybody all together. So change is sad, but it's part of life, too.
There are few utopian schemes that manage to survive the real world. And, Bitcoin was no different. Even if it doesn't, fulfill somebody's philosophical beliefs, it works.
Bitcoin inherently a bad thing? Is it an evil thing? No. But it can be used for bad things. Everything from terrorist financing to ransomware, hacking, public corruption, drugs, drug trafficking organizations. That's the thing, it's money now.
Like as a monetary economist, and even as a technological enthusiast, what you would really like is for something as wonderful as Bitcoin to be handed to humanity like on a cloud. Just coming in, here is your gift, and everybody will start using it, But that's not the way it happens. It has to enter in through financial markets and become economically viable, meaning that it has to pass through this weird stage where people are testing things and buying it and selling it. Every technology does this. It was the same with railroads, back in the 19th century. There were all kinds of scams, bankruptcies, injuries, accidents, terrible things happen. But at the end of the day, we've got railroads, and that's awesome.
Mark Karpelès, who is almost like a theoretical physicist put in charge of, landing a man on the moon, probably not the right man for the job. I mean, it must be frustrating to be Mark and have once been one of the most influential people in the world of Bitcoin, have access to a huge amount of money, and now be here in Japan in limbo, accused of crimes he didn't really commit. His reputation destroyed, no money, certainly not the missing 500,000 Bitcoins. Lots of people angry with him, and he is just the guy who got in a little bit over his head.
Well, at first, I wanted to find him and punch him in the face for losing the money, like everyone. And then, I talked to him, and I realized he didn't steal the money. And I said, okay, well, let's just not be so angry at him. And yeah, it'd be very difficult to be Mark Karpelès and have to face the press after losing everyone's money. I probably would just never go online again if it were me.
J'ai été libéré d'un gros poids d'une certaine façon avec la disparition de MTGox. Mais j'ai toujours cette histoire de procès en cours, mais j'ai aussi un certain nombre de devoirs envers les clients qui étaient clients de MTGox. Toute cette affaire, c'était beaucoup de remise en question et c'était aussi un grand coup dans mon ego professionnel. D'avoir été hacké, d'avoir manqué, d'avoir vu ça pendant des années, d'avoir au final commis un certain nombre d'erreurs qui ont amené à cette situation. Dans le sens que ce qui s'est passé, c'était clairement un manque de compétences de ma part. Après, on peut m'accuser de pas mal de choses. Mais d'avoir volé des bitcoins, non. Enfin voilà, c'est...
Est-ce que tu apprends de tes erreurs ou pas?
J'apprends, oui. Enfin, en tout cas, j'ai l'intention... c'est mon intention d'apprendre de mes erreurs. Après, je sais pas, je me vois pas de l'extérieur. Je suis moi, donc j'ai une certaine limite dans ce que je peux voir. Je sais pas si ce que j'apprends et la façon dont j'adapte mon comportement est adéquate ou pas.
Certaines personnes qui nous ont dit qu'ils ne seraient pas étonnés si tu étais atteint du syndrome d'Asperger. Tu vois ce que c'est le syndrome d'Asperger?
Oui, je connais ce que c'est, mais...
Est-ce que ça te parle ou est-ce que tu trouves que c'est fantasmagorique ou...
C'est pas impossible, je dirais. Quand j'étais jeune, c'était pas trop à la mode de faire ce genre de dépistage. Mais comme je dis, c'est pas impossible. Quand je regarde sur le net, entre autres les personnes qui ont ce genre de soucis, je vois pas mal de points communs aussi.
En général, les gens qui sont victimes de ce syndrome, ils ont du mal à regarder dans les yeux. Toi, tu regardes très bien dans les yeux.
Oui, j'ai beaucoup appris aussi par moi-même à compenser ce genre de soucis. Si je me souviens bien, je crois que c'est quand j'étais au collège, j'ai dû me faire engueuler là-dessus, plusieurs fois. Et du coup, j'ai pris l'habitude d'essayer de me forcer à regarder, donc n'importe quel point sur le visage, le nez ou autre chose. Et en pratiquant ça pendant pas mal d'années, ça devient une habitude.
Donc là, tu regardes mon nez?
Là, je regarde en fait le coin de ton œil droit. C'est-à-dire que j'ai passé 30 ans à vivre avec moi. Et du coup, j'ai développé un certain nombre de méthodes et d'habitudes pour me faire passer pour un humain. Et ça marche beaucoup plus facilement au Japon qu'en France. Parce que par exemple en France, quand tu fais par exemple la bise à quelqu'un, tu fais 2, 3, 4 fois, ça dépend, et tu vis dans le nord, dans le sud, c'est... Alors qu'au Japon, par exemple, voilà, tu fais un bonjour, ça marche partout. C'est moins stressant.
Ça prend beaucoup de place dans ta vie au quotidien, ce réajustement permanent à l'autre?
Un petit peu. Ça dépend de la situation, ça dépend de pas mal de choses. Si tu veux un exemple, par exemple, là on est en train de parler, on est assis à une table, je passe peut-être 20-25% de mon conscient à réfléchir à ce que je dois faire avec mes mains. Est-ce que je les mets comme ça? Est-ce que je les mets comme ça? Fermer les mains, c'est un signe psychologique qu'on est fermé, donc non, il faut pas. Mettre les mains sous la table, ma grand-mère, elle dit il faut pas, donc non. Enfin,
Mais c'est une volonté de contrôle, alors?
Et c'est... Je passe mon temps à y réfléchir. C'est-à-dire, si je laisse mes mains comme ça, au bout d'un certain temps, je me dis, est-ce que ça va pas être pas naturel de pas du tout bouger les mains? Donc pareil, je regarde aussi ce que tu fais et je t'imite.
Tu veux un stylo?
Pas besoin, mais...
What's the moral of this story, Greg?
Look, I'm not sure what the moral is here, apart from if you're selling a product, make sure you've got that product before you tell everybody we're open for business.